The silver ship hung silently above the African plains, its hull reflecting the golden sunrise. Inside, Robert adjusted his viewing screen, watching the group of early humans moving below. They weren't quite human yet, not as he knew them. Their backs were still bent, their foreheads low, and their movements more animal than intelligent. But that was about to change. "The test subjects are ready," he said, turning to face the ship's control room. 3 other makers stood there, their tall forms casting long shadows across the metallic floor. This modification should speed up their brain development by at least a factor of 10. Tom, the project supervisor, stepped forward. His silver eyes narrowed as he studied the data floating in the air between them. "Your predictions seem optimistic. No species has ever responded this well to genetic upgrading." "That's because no species had this much potential," Robert replied, his fingers dancing across the control panel. "These creatures already use basic tools. They have social structures. They even show signs of abstract thinking. They just need a push." The genetic modification beam hummed to life beneath the ship. It was invisible to the primitive humans below, but Robert could see its effects through his instruments. The beam targeted specific genes, activating some, suppressing others, creating new neural pathways that would change these beings forever. Hours passed as the beam did its work. The other makers left one by one, but Robert stayed, watching. He had studied thousands of species across hundreds of worlds, but something about these creatures fascinated him. Perhaps it was their determination. Even in their primitive state, they had survived predators that were stronger, faster, and fiercer. They had spread across their continent using nothing but simple stone tools and their wits. The first changes appeared 3 days later. Robert noticed it in the way they looked at things, really looked, with understanding beginning to dawn in their eyes. When one of them picked up a stick, he didn't just use it as a tool. He studied it, tested its weight, and then did something extraordinary. He broke it to make it better. "This is impossible," Tom said when he returned to check the results. "Their neural activity has increased by 15 factors, not 10. The modifications are spreading faster than we projected, creating new patterns we didn't program." Robert couldn't hide his excitement. "Don't you see? They're not just accepting our changes. They're improving on them. Their brains are making connections we didn't even plan for." But Tom's face showed concern rather than joy. "The Council won't like this. We're supposed to guide evolution, not create unpredictable mutations. These beings, they're developing too fast, too randomly. We should stop the experiment." "We can't," Robert protested, pointing to his screens. "Look at them. They're already starting to teach each other. They're developing language faster than any species we've upgraded. Their tool use is becoming more complex by the day. This isn't just success. This is something entirely new." The argument went all the way to the Maker Council. For weeks, they debated what to do with the rapidly evolving humans. Some wanted to terminate the experiment immediately. Others saw the potential for a new kind of intelligent life. In the end, they reached a compromise. The experiment would continue, but they would leave monitoring stations across the planet. If these new humans ever became too dangerous, too unpredictable, the makers would return to correct their creation. As the ship prepared to leave Earth, Robert made one last modification that he told no one about. Deep in the human genetic code, he added something special, a gift that would take thousands of generations to fully develop. The ability to adapt, to change, to become more than their creators had planned. Standing at the ship's window, watching the small group of humans below, Robert smiled. They were already walking straighter, looking at the stars with new eyes. In their faces, he saw not just intelligence awakening, but something more: curiosity, creativity, the spark of something that might one day surpass even the makers themselves. "Good luck," he whispered as the ship rose into the sky. "I hope we meet again, as equals." The hot sun beat down on the Atacama Desert as James wiped sweat from his forehead. 20 years of archaeology had taught him patience, but this dig was different. The metal walls they had uncovered weren't just old, they weren't human at all. "Professor," his assistant Bill called from inside the excavation pit. "You need to see this." James carefully climbed down the metal ladder they had installed. The walls around him hummed faintly, despite being buried for thousands of years. As he reached the bottom, Bill pointed his light at something on the wall. A handprint scanner, still glossy as if it had been made yesterday. "Should we?" Bill hesitated, looking at James. "Should we try it?" James took a deep breath. He had dreamed of moments like this his whole career. Slowly, he placed his hand on the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wall lit up with a soft blue glow, and a door silently slid open. "Call the team," James whispered, his heart racing. "Call everyone." Within hours, the chamber was filled with scientists and equipment. The facility was enormous, stretching deep underground. But it was the holographic message that changed everything. A tall, human-like figure appeared in the center of the main room. Its voice spoke perfect English, as if it had been recorded yesterday instead of 500,000 years ago. "To our creation," the figure said. "If you are watching this, you have reached a level of technology that allows you to find us. I am Robert, lead scientist of the Maker expedition that gave birth to your species." The room fell silent. James felt his legs go weak. Bill caught him before he could fall. "Your DNA was modified from your primitive ancestors," the hologram continued. "We gave you the potential for greater intelligence, creativity, and adaptability. But you have grown far beyond our expectations. This message serves two purposes: to reveal your true origins and to warn you." The hologram changed, showing images of stars, ships, and beings that looked like the speaker. "The Makers will return one day to judge what you have become. Some of them fear you. They believe you are too unpredictable, too dangerous. They will try to change you, to make you more like them." Robert's face showed something that looked like pride mixed with worry. "But I believe in what you might become. In this facility, you will find data about your creation, about our technology, about us. Use it wisely. You have little time." The message ended with a date. "Return expected. Earth year 27,350. "That's next year," Bill whispered. The discovery shook the world. As teams of scientists studied the alien facility, they found more than just history. They found technical data about spacecraft, weapons, and genetic science far beyond human understanding. But they also found something disturbing: monitoring stations, still active, spread across Earth. World leaders gathered in an emergency meeting. Military commanders planned defenses. Scientists worked day and night to understand the alien technology before it was too late. James spent weeks in the facility, learning everything he could. One night, as he studied the genetic data, he noticed something strange. The modifications the Makers had made weren't just random improvements. There was a pattern, a hidden design that Robert had slipped into humanity's DNA. "Look at this," he told Bill, pointing to his screen. "These genetic markers, they're not just for intelligence. They're for adaptation, for rapid learning, for thinking in ways the Makers don't expect. Robert didn't just make us smarter, he made us different." As they worked, strange signals began appearing in deep space. The Maker ships were coming, just as Robert had warned. But thanks to his hidden gift, humanity wasn't helpless. They had found the facility in time, and with it, the tools to fight back. James looked at the star maps showing the approaching fleet. "We're ready," he whispered. "I hope you're watching, Robert. We're going to prove you right." They appeared on a Tuesday morning. Thousands of silver ships filling the sky like stars at noon. Earth's military satellites caught them emerging from what looked like tears in space, their massive forms blocking out the sun over major cities worldwide. The largest ship, nearly the size of Manhattan, positioned itself above the United Nations building in New York. Smaller vessels surrounded it in a perfect geometric pattern that no human fleet could maintain. Inside the UN's Emergency Command Center, James watched the screens with world leaders and military commanders. A year of preparation didn't feel like enough now that the makers had actually arrived. Incoming transmission, a technician announced. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, in all languages. The main screen lit up, showing a tall figure that looked almost human, but not quite. Its proportions were too perfect, its movements too precise. "People of Earth," the figure said, its voice carrying an artificial smoothness. "I am Administrator Mark of the Maker Council. We have returned to evaluate our creation." The room stayed silent as Mark continued. "Your development has exceeded parameters. You have become unpredictable, dangerous to yourselves, and potentially to others. This must be corrected." James stepped forward when the world leaders looked to him as their expert on the makers. "What kind of correction?" he asked. "Genetic realignment," Mark replied. "Your species will be adjusted to follow logical paths of development. Your tendency toward chaos will be removed. This is not a request. You have 24 hours to prepare your population for the procedure." The transmission ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. Then everyone started talking at once. "We can't let them change who we are. But how can we fight them? Their ships are everywhere." The UN Secretary General raised her hands for silence. "Dr. James, you've studied their technology. Do we have any chance?" James looked at the data streaming in from Earth's defense systems. The makers' ships were beyond anything they had prepared for. Their shields absorbed energy weapons like they were nothing. Their hulls were made of materials that didn't exist on the periodic table. But then he remembered something from the ancient facility. "They think in straight lines," he said. "Everything they do follows perfect logic. That's why they fear us. We don't." He turned to the military commanders. "A year ago, we found something in the maker facility. Weapon designs, but not like theirs. They were Robert's personal files, showing technology he developed by thinking like us, unpredictably." General Ann stepped forward. She had spent the last year preparing Earth's unified defense force for this moment. "My teams have those weapons ready," she said. "But we needed to know when to use them. If the makers are this logical, then they'll never expect us to attack first," James finished. "They'll expect us to either submit or try to negotiate. They'll have plans for every logical response." "And if we do something illogical?" the Secretary General asked. James smiled. "Then we might have a chance. Robert left us more than just technology. He left us the ability to think in ways the makers can't understand. They see that as a flaw, but it's actually our strength." General Ann was already giving orders through her comm system. Around the world, hidden bases activated. Weapons designed with both human creativity and maker technology powered up. "If we're going to do this," Ann said, "we do it now, while they still think we're harmless." The Secretary General looked at the faces around her, then at the ships filling the sky outside. "Very well. Humanity didn't survive for 500,000 years to be corrected now." She turned to General Ann. "Launch the attack." As alarms began to sound and the world prepared for war, James watched the maker ships through the window. They hung there, perfect and precise, never expecting that their creations would dare to strike first. "You wanted logical, predictable humans," he whispered, "but Robert gave us something better. He gave us the power to surprise you." The first wave of Earth's attack caught the makers completely off guard. Instead of cowering in fear, the humans launched thousands of small ships that seemed to move in random patterns. The makers' perfect formations broke apart as they tried to track targets that refused to follow logical flight paths. In the underground command center, General Ann watched the battle screens with intense focus. "Keep changing directions," she ordered. "Don't let them predict where we'll go next." The human pilots flew like they were dancing, spinning and diving in ways that defied traditional space combat tactics. Some ships would charge straight at the maker vessels. only to spin away at the last second. Others would fly in spirals that made no strategic sense, but somehow always ended up in the right position to strike. "They're confused," James said, pointing to the enemy formations. "Look how they keep trying to make sense of our attack patterns." On the screens, the massive maker ships moved with mechanical precision, attempting to counter each human movement with perfect logic. But there was no logic to counter. The humans attacked like a swarm of angry bees, each fighter choosing its own path. "It's working better than we hoped," Anne said. "But we need more. Show me what you found in the facility's databanks." James pulled up the genetic research he had been studying. "Robert didn't just make us smarter," he explained. "He gave us the ability to think creatively under pressure. Our brains actually work faster when we're in danger, making connections that even we don't expect." As if to prove his point, a young pilot discovered that flying in a figure-8 pattern created a strange resonance in the Maker's shield technology. Within minutes, other pilots were copying and modifying the technique, each adding their own twist to the maneuver. "They're adapting," Anne said with pride. "Not just following orders, but improving on them." In space, the battle continued to shift. The Maker ships, for all their advanced technology, couldn't adjust to the constantly changing tactics. Their weapons were powerful, but useless against targets that never followed predictable paths. "Send in the second wave," Anne commanded. "Let's show them what else we learned from their facility." The next group of human ships carried weapons reverse-engineered from Maker technology, but modified in ways their creators had never imagined. Instead of trying to overpower the Maker shields, these weapons used chaotic energy patterns that slipped through their defenses like water through a net. James studied the data flowing across his screens. "Every time they adapt to one of our strategies, our people create 3 new ones. We're not just fighting them. We're evolving faster than they can respond." A message flashed across the command screens. The Makers were calling for communication. Administrator Mark's face appeared, showing the first signs of confusion they had seen. "This is not logical," he said. "Your tactics have no pattern. Your attacks follow no strategic doctrine. How are you functioning without proper organization?" Anne stepped forward. "That's exactly why we're winning. You gave us the ability to think, but Robert gave us the ability to think differently. Every human out there is fighting their own way, making their own choices. You can't predict us because we don't even know what we're going to do next." For the first time, they saw uncertainty in Mark's perfect features. "This was not part of the design," he said. "You were meant to be improved, not chaotic." "Chaos isn't always bad," James replied. "Sometimes it's exactly what you need to survive, to evolve, to become something new." Outside, the battle continued to turn in Earth's favor. Human ships danced through space, each pilot adding their own style to the fight. The Makers' perfect formations began to break apart as they faced something they had never encountered in all their millions of years of existence, an enemy they couldn't understand. Anne smiled as she watched another Maker ship retreat. "They wanted to make us perfect," she said. "Instead, they made us perfectly unpredictable." The command center erupted in cheers as another Maker ship retreated from Earth's atmosphere. But General Anne knew better than to celebrate too early. The Makers still had thousands of ships in orbit, and they were starting to adjust their tactics. "They're learning," she said to James, pointing at the tactical display. "Look how they're trying to copy our randomness." James studied the screen. The Maker ships were indeed attempting to move in unpredictable patterns, but there was still an underlying logic to their movements. Like someone trying to write random numbers, they couldn't help but follow patterns. "They can try," he said, "but they can't override their basic nature. Being logical is built into their genetics, just like being unpredictable is built into ours." A warning alarm blared through the command center. On the main screen, Administrator Mark's face appeared again. He looked different now. His perfect features showed signs of strain. "Your resistance is impressive," he admitted, "but futile. We have activated our primary weapon systems. You have one final chance to surrender." Anne looked at James. They had found references to these weapons in the ancient facilities database, but no details about how they worked. "What do you think?" she asked. James smiled. "I think it's time to show them what we found in the lower levels." He pressed a button on his console, sending a signal to a hidden base in the Antarctic. Deep under the ice, a device they had rebuilt from Robert's secret files hummed to life. It was a strange combination of maker technology and human innovation, using principles that broke several laws of physics. "Launch Project Chaos," Anne ordered. Around the world, similar devices activated. They didn't attack the maker ships directly. Instead, they created waves of pure disorder in space itself. Areas where physics worked differently, where straight lines became curves, and where perfect logic simply failed. The effect on the maker fleet was immediate. Their ships, dependent on precise calculations and perfect order, began to malfunction. Weapons wouldn't fire. Shields flickered. Communication systems filled with nonsense. How are you doing this?" Mark's voice crackled through the distortion. "These effects violate fundamental universal constants." "That's the point," James replied. "Robert left us plans for technology that works because it shouldn't work. He knew you wouldn't be able to counter something that defies logic itself." On the tactical displays, the battle had become a strange dance. Human ships flew through the chaotic zones without trouble, their pilots instinctively adjusting to the changing conditions. But the maker vessels struggled, their advanced computers unable to cope with areas where math itself became unpredictable. "Their fleet is splitting up," Anne announced. "They're trying to retreat from the chaos zones, but that's leaving gaps in their formation. All ships, attack pattern Delta," she ordered. "Hit them while they're confused." The human fleet struck from all directions at once. Their hybrid weapons, combining maker power with human creativity, tore through the now vulnerable enemy ships. Some pilots even used the chaos zones like slingshots, building up impossible speeds before striking. In orbit, the massive maker command ship began to pull back. Administrator Mark's final transmission showed something humans had never expected to see: fear. "This is impossible," he said. "You've turned disorder itself into a weapon. You've weaponized chaos." "No," James corrected him. "We've weaponized humanity. Everything you see is a flaw in us: our unpredictability, our illogical choices, our ability to thrive in chaos. These are our greatest strengths." The battle raged on, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. One by one, the maker ships retreated, their perfect formations shattered, their logical minds unable to cope with warfare that followed no rules. Anne watched them go with a mixture of pride and amazement. "We didn't just beat them," she said. "We proved that their whole idea of perfection was wrong." "Robert knew that all along," James replied. "That's why he made us different. Not flawed, just perfect in our own way." While the battle in space wound down, James returned to the ancient facility in the Atacama Desert. Something had been bothering him about Robert's original message, and he needed answers. Bill met him at the entrance, looking excited. "We found a new chamber," Bill said, leading the way through the humming corridors. "It opened up after we used those chaos weapons, like it was waiting for us to prove ourselves." The new room was smaller than the others, but its walls were covered with moving images showing the history of the makers. James watched in amazement as Robert's personal logs played out before them. "Our civilization has reached its limit," Robert's voice echoed from the recordings. "We achieved perfection, but that perfection has become our prison. We no longer grow. We no longer change. We no longer dream." The images showed the maker civilization, beautiful, ordered, and completely stagnant. Their ships had flown the same patterns for millions of years. Their cities hadn't changed in centuries. Even their thoughts followed the same logical paths they always had. "This is why he created us differently," James whispered. "We weren't meant to be their servants. We were meant to be their salvation." More recordings played, showing Robert's secret work. He hadn't just modified human DNA to make them smarter. He had studied thousands of species across the galaxy, finding useful traits and combining them in ways his logical people would never have considered. The Council thinks I am creating better servants, Robert's image continued. They do not understand. I am creating beings who can do what we have forgotten. Adapt, imagine, create. I am creating our successors. Bill pointed to another display. Look at these genetic sequences, the modifications he made. They're not just random improvements. They're like seeds, designed to grow and change in ways even he couldn't predict. James thought about the battle they had just fought. That's why the chaos weapons worked. He built the potential for understanding chaos into our DNA. We can handle disorder not because we're flawed, but because we're designed to thrive in it. A new hologram appeared. Robert's final message. If you are seeing this, you have proven my theory correct. You have faced the makers and shown them what they have lost. The weapons I left you were a test. Only beings who truly understood the power of unpredictability could use them. The message continued, showing more of Robert's plans. But weapons are not your true purpose. Your gift is the ability to think in ways we cannot, to find paths we would never consider, to dream dreams we have forgotten how to dream. James sat down heavily as he realized the full scope of Robert's plan. He didn't just want us to survive the Maker's return, he said. He wanted us to show them a better way. Suddenly, the facility's communications system activated. General N's voice came through. James, are you seeing this? The Maker ships, they're not retreating anymore. They're just sitting there, and they're requesting to talk. Not to surrender, just to talk. James looked at the final images Robert had left, showing his hopes for the future. A future where makers and humans work together, combining logic and creativity, order and chaos, old wisdom and new dreams. Tell them we're ready to talk, James replied. I think I finally understand what Robert was trying to create. Not a war between creators and created, but a bridge between two ways of thinking. As he spoke, more data flowed across the facility's screens. Robert's final gift to both his people and his creations. Plans for technologies that could only work if makers and humans built them together, combining perfect logic with creative intuition. He made us different from them on purpose, James said softly. Not better, not worse. Just different enough to help them remember how to change, how to grow, how to be imperfect again. Bill looked at the images of impossible technologies and unthinkable advancements. So what happens now? James smiled. Now we do what humans do best. We adapt. We imagine. We create something new. Together. The Great Hall of the United Nations had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Maker representatives sat beside human leaders, their perfect forms a stark contrast to the natural variations of human appearance. Administrator Mark, looking less certain than before, faced General Ann and James across the central table. We have reviewed the data from Robert's facility, Mark said, his voice carrying a new tone of humility. We had forgotten our own history. Before we achieved perfection, we too lived in chaos. We too dreamed and created. James nodded, spreading out the designs they had discovered. That's why Robert created us the way he did. He saw that perfection without growth isn't really perfect at all. The screens around them showed the first joint projects between humans and makers. Hybrid ships that combined maker precision with human innovation. Medical treatments that use both logical and creative approaches to healing. New forms of space travel that worked because they ignored the normal rules of physics. Our ships are already implementing some of your unusual modifications, Mark admitted. They work better than our original designs, even though they shouldn't. It defies logic. That's the point, Anne said with a smile. Logic is a tool, not a cage. Sometimes you need to think outside it to find better solutions. A young human scientist demonstrated one of the new technologies, a communication system that used controlled chaos to transmit data faster than light. The maker scientists watched in fascination as she adjusted it by intuition rather than calculation. "We believed we had reached the peak of evolution," Mark said. "But you have shown us that there is no peak. There is only the continuous climb, the endless discovery of new possibilities." Outside the UN building, humans and makers were already working together. Maker ships now carried human pilots who could navigate through chaos zones. Human cities were being improved with maker technology, but in ways that encouraged creativity rather than enforced order. Robert's final message mentioned a threat, James said, bringing up the last set of data they had found. Something coming from outside our galaxy. Something that neither pure logic nor pure chaos could defeat alone. Mark nodded gravely. "We have seen signs of it. That is partly why we wanted to correct you. We thought only perfect order could protect us. But now we know better." And added, "Whatever's coming, we'll face it together." Maker precision guided by human intuition. Perfect logic balanced with creative chaos. In the ancient facility, which had become a joint research center, Bill was showing a group of maker scientists how humans brainstormed ideas. They seemed confused by the process at first, but slowly began to understand the value of considering impossible things. "Your species has surpassed all our expectations," Mark said, watching the collaboration with growing appreciation. Robert was right. "You are not our servants or our mistakes. You are our children, grown into something new and wonderful." James thought about the 500,000 years of human evolution that had led to this moment. "And you are our parents," he replied. "Not our masters or our enemies. We have so much to learn from each other." The meeting concluded with the signing of the first Earthmaker Alliance. But more importantly, it ended with something the makers had not done in millions of years. They asked questions about what might be possible, rather than simply calculating what was logical. As the sun set over New York, James stood with Anne watching humans and makers working together on a new ship design. The vessel broke every rule of traditional space engineering, yet promised to be more effective than anything either species had created alone. "Robert would be proud," Anne said softly. "We didn't just survive their return. We helped them remember who they used to be." James smiled as he watched a maker scientist laugh. Actually laugh. At a human engineer's joke. "That's the real victory," he said. "Not beating them in battle, but showing them that perfection isn't about being flawless. It's about never stopping growing, never stopping dreaming, never being afraid to try something new, even if it's completely illogical." Anne asked with a grin. "Especially then," James replied. "After all, that's what makes us human. And now, that's what's helping them remember how to be alive again."